Okay, so the next presentation is on concrete pavement life extension. John Becker and give the presentation. John has served with the concrete pavement industry in Pennsylvania since 2000 as executive director for the ACPA Pennsylvania chapter since 2006.
I am obviously not Larry Schofield. Larry, got to just give him some recognition. Back in February, we had our annual concrete pavement conference, and we had a good bit of snow here in Harrisburg, and Larry flew in from Arizona, flew to Baltimore, got stuck in traffic on I-83, got off of 83, took one of the side roads, found himself a little bit behind, too close to a truck that was trying to climb up one of these two-lane winding roads, and the truck started to slide back. So to get out of the way of the truck, Larry backed his car up into a ditch. So he was stuck in the snow for a couple hours. AAA pulled him out, but he made it to the conference and he made his presentation. So last week I was talking with Larry and I told him, I said, hey, you're not going to have anything like this in Harrisburg. We're going to have beautiful weather. I don't think he believed me. I went online last night, pulled up Facebook, and I don't know, Larry and John Roberts work together. So I pulled up John Roberts' Facebook page. We found out where Larry really is. Anyway, I've been asked to talk a little bit about extending pavement life, extending the life of pavement preservation techniques. The slide that you've got here is just your classic definition of pavement preservation. All the topics that you see there, the definition, we're going to touch on all of those very briefly in the talk. Pretty straightforward. We want to extend the life of the pavement, the life of the technique. Safety is always paramount, and we want to make sure the customers are happy. How the process is accomplished, both through the long-term network approach, using integrated cost-effective practices. The bottom line here is we need data-driven decisions. Pavement life extension, a nice picture here of a next-gen concrete pavement surface. So we're going to get in, I guess the question that Larry had is, are we extending the treatment life or are we extending the pavement life? And how does one tie in with the other? Are the treatments cost effective? Now, I had the notes from Larry's presentation, and I'm not sure if he's got family in the dental business, because about 8 or 9 slides he talked about dental work. So if you see that little tooth in the lower part of the upper right-hand side there, I'm supposed to mention that doing CPR repair, it's like dental work. We want to make sure that we hit it at the right time. We don't want to have a cavity and wait. Well, we're not going to take care of the cavity. We're going to wait for the tooth to get completely pulled down out, and then we'll go ahead and get an implant or something along those lines. If we've got a thing that's wrong, we hit it at the time and not wait for 10 years until everything else needs to get addressed. You maintain a concrete pavement in good repair, it should stay good for the entire life of the pavement. One of the things that we sometimes deal with is a little bit of roughness early on in the pavement. The question is should we be grinding our pavement at year 10, year 15? I think some of the techniques that our paving contractors have done in more recent years with some of the real-time smoothness, we are starting to see some very good IRI numbers in the 40s and 50s without any diamond grinding at all taking place. A lot of our pavements, higher volume roads, they take a beating. The low volume roads, when we use concrete pavement, those pavements seem to last a very long time. We're going here with for more data, feeding the pavement preservation, the rehab data, all that into the LCCA process. It's an interesting curve that we've seen, the classic pavement deterioration, pavement preservation curve, where you're starting out with, in the early life of the pavement, it's preservation, then you go to restoration. But when you take a look at a pavement such as the one that I've got a picture there, that's in Bellefonte, Ohio, that was built 126 years ago. And yeah, there was some rehabilitation work, but when we look at that curve, pavement in Bellefonte really doesn't match up real well with that. We're going into here. Alicia on Tuesday talked about circle having everything kind of going, feeding back into taking your data, putting pavement down, collecting the data, fixing it, and going through that entire process and repeating the process. And that's what we've got here is our circle of life. You know, we think of concrete pavement as being typically used for heavy loads. We see them on the interstate. We often use, and when we do use the concrete pavement on a low volume road, we get some pretty darn good life out of it. Not to say that it does work pretty well with the high volume type roads as well. A nice little picture on the definition of sustainability. Here we got a pavement. This is the one that I mentioned, Bellefonte, Ohio. First concrete pavement in the U.S. built in 1891. One here. It's still in service, 126 years after it was built. Another shot of just reinforcing the idea of the dental work, fixing the pavement when it needs to be fixed. This is the classic deterioration curve. This is really pretty much developed more for the asphalt pavement side, and 95–96% of our pavements are asphalt pavements. So, you know, in that aspect, maybe this curve works real well. But when we want to take a look at comparing that with what we see with the concrete pavement, it's maybe a little bit different. It gets back to the dental work. So when we see the deterioration take place, you know, we don't want to wait until year 10. We may need to do some dental work a little bit beforehand to do the rehab work. And that's where we're getting into that additional life that we're buying by doing that repair. A little bit of just comment on pavement rehabilitation. You know, years back, I think the comments were made that we've got a zero maintenance pavement, and I think that caused a lot of problems. I think people had the perception, maybe, and it's not only a perception, that we put a concrete pavement down and we didn't touch it. And for all reality, in a lot of cases, we really didn't. It's only been, I think, in the past 10, 15 years that we've really seen states jumping on, and I know particularly here in Pennsylvania, it was only about really 12 years ago that we really got serious with the whole host of different types of CPR techniques. One of the things that's good to know, good to say is, you know, a lot of states have also had some very tight funding, and we attack things from the worst first type scenario. And I know the work that the department's been doing, Mike Long's group is taking a look at, let's not necessarily attack the worst first, but let's attack the ones where we can get the most cost-effective improvement to our network. Interesting slide over here talks a little bit about comparing the number of easels a pavement was designed for. That's the orange. Green is the amount of traffic that pavement carried before intervention, the diamond grinding took place, and the blue is how many loads, easel loads, have taken place. And with all except for one case, the diamond grinding, the rehab work, did not take place until after the designed easels were carried on that pavement. Just touch a little bit on safety. Yesterday was Work Zone Safety Awareness Day. Interesting, sad statistic, and this is from NHTSA. On average, 14 motorists and 2 highway workers are killed in work zones in the United States every week. Now, we've done a lot of work to try to raise the awareness of the dangerous work zone, and we particularly have been focusing on our employees, our fellow workers, inspectors. But when you look at the statistic, if you're a motorist, you're 7 times more likely to get killed in a work zone than a worker. And either case, those numbers are both really unacceptable. But it's as much, you know, we've done, I think, a great job at raising the awareness of work zone safety from our perspective, but I think we need to carry the message to our friends, family, and neighbors as well, because there are a lot of things out in work zones that folks are just not aware of. One of the good things, and I'm happy to say that at least in Pennsylvania, we joined Maryland, our neighbor to the south, just this past year. The legislature did approve allowing the department and the turnpike to put cameras in work zones. So The hope being not to generate additional revenue, but to slow the traffic down so that everyone gets home the next day, that night. Touching just real quick, I don't want to belabor this slide. We certainly do need to take into account safety improvements. I don't know if it necessarily always gets done in all the CPR type projects, but it is something that I think each owner agency needs to take into account when doing pavement preservation work. I want to touch just on a few of the CPR activities. These are pretty much listed in my opinion. I think it's pretty much in line with a lot of state highway agencies' practices in terms of if you're going to do concrete pavement restoration, what's the order you need to do them? And there's a whole host of techniques that you've got there. I've got a couple, slide on each of these techniques. Also want to just mention that there's also some tools that are in the development process. PennDOT has done a yeoman's effort to put some additional tools into the Pub 408, into the RC standards tools that have been used in other northern tier states that get into the, I've always looked at CPR as being something where the least intrusive you are, the better for the patient. 20, 30 years ago when there was something that ailed a patient, the surgeon was out there ready to cut things on out. And there's a whole host of less intrusive MRIs, other technologies that allow the medical profession to pinpoint what needs to get fixed. Well, it's the same. Let's treat the concrete pavement as a technique, as a patient as well. And we focus on just fixing and just addressing the things that need to be fixed and be as least intrusive as possible. Dollar bar retrofit is taking a concrete joint that hadn't been doweled or a crack and putting dowels into the joint. Cross-stitching is for longitudinal cracks. We do not use cross-stitching for transverse cracks, not if we want that technique to work. The dollar bar retrofit is the device that we want to use for the transverse cracks because our pavements expand and contract with temperature changes. The longitudinal joints are more like hinge joints. We don't want them opening them up. And the tie bars, which we kind of just put on in, alternate about every 3 foot, drilling holes at a 40-degree angle, and drive number 4 bars in there, epoxy them on in, and that holds cracks nice and tight. I don't know what the IRI on that roadway on the bottom left was, but I can guarantee you it was a whole heck of a lot better after they got done doing the slab stabilization and jacking. Partial depth repair. It's a technique that in some states, some districts has worked very well. In other districts it has not. Other agencies it has not. I think yesterday or day before the comment was made on average performance, and look at the average performance of a spa repair is about 8 to 10 years. Well, it's 8 to 10 years, but if you're the state that's getting 2 or 3 years performance, that average really doesn't mean anything for you. And if you are a state that's getting the 2 or 3 years of performance on the partial depth repair, that means we need to step back and what is it that we are doing differently from what the others are doing to make sure that when we're doing this type of technique, we do get the 8 to 10 year performance out of this repair. Full depth repair, we sometimes do need to take a slab out, series of slabs on out, and this is what I call a little bit more of it being more intrusive than the partial depth repair. We're taking the entire slab on out. Depending on what kind of base we've got, we sometimes have to do a lot of base repair underneath. Sometimes the quality of the base is the reason that we had the cracking and the distress taking place in the pavement to begin with. We take the concrete pavement on out that's been deteriorated. Sometimes, like I said, the base comes out with it. We repair the base. We've got to drill holes in to the existing to the concrete that's going to remain in place, and typically that's a 12-foot wide panel. We typically put 11, some states do still 12 dowels per joint. We drill holes, put epoxy in there. We got to clean that hole on out, and if we put those dowel bars in, it's one of the things that I'm seeing not as good a performance on our full depth patches on a handful of projects. We need to make sure that we get that epoxy grout to encapsulate the entire dowel. Otherwise, all this effort to take out the concrete, chip out the concrete, pull it on out, lift it on out, do the base repair, if we don't take care of making sure those dowels are properly installed, we've just thrown away some significant dollars, and 2 or 3 years later, we're back to where we don't have an acceptable riding pavement. Diamond grinding and grooving, a lot of that is done for the purpose of getting a better IRI. There's a lot of rehab techniques. A smoother pavement, a smoother rehab pavement is also going to last longer than a rougher one. So if we do a full depth patch, we generally want to go ahead and make sure that we do the diamond grinding. Some of the other techniques, depending on what the condition of the pavement is, we want to make sure that we get a good riding surface at the time when we walk away from that CPR type project. Joint and crack sealing is another technique. Interestingly, there are a number of states that have gone to the eliminating joint sealing. There's a industry group called the Seal No Seal Group. There's a handful of states. I don't think Wisconsin sealed a concrete pavement joint on an interstate type pavement in about 30 years. There's a few other states that are doing that. What we do here in Pennsylvania is we do seal our joints, we do seal our cracks. One of the things that we've seen is that our type 2 sealants have not given us the kind of performance that we need, and so we recently went to the type 4 sealant, which is really more suitable for the environment that we have up here in the northern tier. Last thing is buried treasure, and this has been done in I know it's been done in New Jersey and a handful of other states. It's essentially taking a concrete pavement that was overlaid for one reason or another. The asphalt is taken on off, and what we've got underneath, in some cases, is a pretty darn good looking concrete pavement. And the buried treasure concept is essentially taking that pavement, doing some minor CPR work, diamond grinding it, and opening that pavement up to traffic. And like I said, New Jersey was one state that tried that. One of the things that we also want to take a look at when we do data collection for when we do CPR techniques is when we collect the data and when we go out and do the rehab work. I know the policy in Pennsylvania is that when we scope out a project, within that project is going to be field visited within 6 months of the CPR project being put out on the street. And so that kind of helps to minimize the deterioration that takes place. It really doesn't do us any good to go out, collect data, scope a project, and then not go out there for another 2 or 3 years, because that pavement in that 2 or 3 year period is taking on more loads, more freeze-thaw cycles, and is getting beat down beforehand. Dowel bar retrofit, I just want to show a curve. This was developed by the FHWA expert technical group a few years ago. They took a look at the brown curve, I guess, is the FHWA ETG group, and the gray one is the NCC. And it's essentially just showing that expected life that you're going to get, and we picked the 50%. If you're doing a dowel bar retrofit, the FHWA survey suggested that you're going to probably get about 14 years life out of that repair. The Tech Center had a little bit more on that. I think this is an interesting graph. This is data that was collected on doing DBR. What I think is remarkable here is if you look at the projects where they got almost 30 years life out of this pavement. Now this was a jointed plane pavement. I believe it's jointed plane, undoweled, Interstate 90. Undoweled pavement served for 28, 30, 35 years. They performed DBR, and after the DBR was performed, they're getting on some of those sections of pavement, we're getting 50, 60 years life out of that, which I think is a pretty darn good performance for a pavement that I think initially, in my opinion, if you don't dowel a pavement, that's for a high type, interstate type pavement, that's not something I would suggest. Just changing gear real quick. We had some nice presentations, and I always like to just put a little plug in on workforce development. We are going to see we already are seeing a changing of the guard. And I look around here in the audience in this room, and I'm going to say probably about 80% of us that are here have got more of our career behind us than what we've got left in front of us, which means we've got a newer generation coming on in. And this newer generation, us folks that have been in the industry, been in the business for 20, 30 years, we've accrued a lot of experience, knowledge, institutional knowledge, technical knowledge, and it's really incumbent on us to try to share as much of that with the folks that are going to be coming in very closely behind us and taking whatever part of the industry organization we're in and carrying the ball moving forward. We all think a little differently. The baby boomers, we approach things a little differently. We're still amazed by the iPhones. The folks that are in the millennials, they can't imagine having lived in a period where we only had 3 television stations and it was black and white TV and you had to get your butt off the couch and turn the channel. So, but there are different ways of thinking. You know, the older, the more seasoned folks, we've looked at it from opening up books and going through what we call the traditional way of learning. YouTube, there's videos, there's a whole host of other ways that information can be shared. The whole concept of workforce development, in my opinion, it can't be overstated. I was real thrilled hearing about FHWA, the presentation on the 6 different techniques that are coming on out that are going to be available online here very shortly on CPR techniques. There's a whole host of webinars through ACPA, through the Tech Center, through FHWA. Just-in-time training, I think, is something that allows the more experienced folks to share their knowledge, experience on a project and apply that and to use that to get a better performing project. Workshops, field demos, one of the things that Larry and I were talking about, he was real excited about the pavement preservation rodeo that was conducted in Nashville a couple of years ago, where they just took a half a day and demonstrated a whole host of different type techniques. Gave everyone the opportunity to get their, feel, touch, feel, smell, the visual part, which I think is an important part of education. But there are a whole number of things that can be done. A few more, the FHWA checklist, contractor training. There's a whole host of things that are coming online, that are online, and I just encourage everyone to make yourselves available to use all those. This wasn't my presentation. Hopefully I was able to convey a little bit of information about CPR techniques. Larry's email is on the screen, mine is on the screen, and at this time I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
John Gary Hoffman from the Pennsylvania Asphalt Pavement Association. You made a comment that pricked my attention on paving to a good ride. 30, 40, 50 inches per mile right out of the chute, and that's everyone's goal, whether it's a black or a white pavement, to do that. Unfortunately, when and I was with PennDOT back in 1992, I believe it was, when we developed the ride specs for asphalt and for concrete pavements, and in doing those ride specs, we felt that we owed the public a smooth ride, so we put a must grind or a must mill specification in place, which was a good thing, I thought. The problem is we have certain bonuses, and when you exceed the threshold and you have to grind or you have to grind back, mill back, we allowed 100% of the bonus to be paid even though the pavement was corrected. And unfortunately, I think what that's driven is some contractors, white or black, disregard paving right out of chute to a smooth pavement and just go in and diamond grind or mill the pavement after the fact. And then I believe we have an inferior product at that point that causes longer term preservation treatments. So would you want to comment on that?
We know that we've got excellent performing contractors that do a very good job, and contractors that their goal is production. Put the pavement down, whether it's black or white, and get it done and move on. And in many of those cases, we're looking at some significant corrective work that needs to take place. One of the things that addresses that was done by the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission is that they have a ride specification that does have a different incentive for an uncorrected lot versus a corrected lot. And it's really not as much for the trying to, I guess it's more to try to incentivize things that are difficult for us to measure in the field, such as, do we have a good track line? Do we have consistent delivery of concrete or asphalt to the paver? Those things are difficult to measure, but the end result is we have less corrective work taking place. There comes a time in every day when a contractor's got to stop their operation. They don't pave 24/7. And I think even the best contractor, in many cases, when you're looking at the startup and the stop at the end of the day, there may be some minor corrective work that takes place. But I think the way that the Turnpike addressed that, I think, is one that's worth looking at for exactly for the reason that you've mentioned. I thank everyone for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your day.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.